So one of the things I want to make sure that I do is make sure that my screen resolution is high enough for my image. Now Photoshop obviously is a pixel based application, and I want to jump in and I'm just going to go to image and go to image size. I'm going to have a quick look here, and typically for print resolution we want about 300 pixels per inch, which this one is, and it's actually quite a large image here. It's about 42 by 28 centimeters, and you can adjust these just to check whether or not you're working in inches or pixels or whatever. So this is actually a fairly large image. I've actually upscaled it, but if we zoom in, we've got a decent resolution there. I wanted to get rid of all this text and stuff on the background here, and for this I am going to use my crop tool. Now crop tool is over here on the left in the toolbar here. The shortcut is C. I'm going to click on that, and as I do, if we zoom out, we can actually see it brings in these corner options here, and with that I can start moving this down and getting a little bit closer to where my image actually is. And we do have a few other options here as well. We do have a straighten tool, and I'll show you that in a moment as well. Once I've got this pretty much cropped, I'm going to hit the tick key, and it's going to crop that down. It's going to kick out anything on the outside, so just be a little bit cautious of that. Now, other option here is the straighten tool. It looks like a little spirit level here, and what this allows us to do is draw a line and move it from one area to the other, and it will try and straighten the image. Now this line here is fairly straight anyway, and this is along with our crop tool here, but if you do have something that's crooked and you want straightening up, you click in the one corner and you click in the other, and it will try and straighten that up. And I go, yeah, you know what, that'll do, and I'm going to hit the tick key on that. It's going to try and straighten up. So at least we're getting something that's looking a little bit neater and aligned for that. Now let's have a look at a few other options that we might have in this. Trying to get rid of the red could be an interesting one. The red's not bad. I don't mind this as a distraction, but again, if you've got a very heavy use of red or blue pencil usually underlying, so let's see if we can get rid of this. Now there is a few different ways of doing this. I'm going to show you one way, and this is by going to image, adjust, and go down to black and white, and here it is there. As we bring this up, comes up with an option palette here, and you'll see that we have reds. Now this one specifically has got reds in here, and this will turn whatever color image you have into black and white, except it has a few cooler options which allow you to target specific colors and decide whether they're going to be lighter or darker. So there aren't any other really any other colors besides red in this. The rest are grayscales, but I can choose to have my reds that are in there go a little bit darker, or ramp them all the way up to white. Now that might actually end up with a cleaner image, but it might also darken some of the areas that the red may have helped out with. So I'm going to find something in between. So this way's got a few extra lines, and this way has a few less. So probably right about there should be good. And I'm going to hit OK with that. Now, as we can see, I've got the before and after with that. So that's why I always like doing a duplicate layer. Cool. Now let's try and fix this image up a bit more. Now, depending on how clean or messy you are, you may have smudge marks or line marks or anything like that you may wish to clean up, or you may wish to darken lines if you've made them too light. Now, one of the best ways to doing this is if we go into image, adjust, and into levels. I'm going to bring this up. This brings up what's called a histogram, and this is a visual interpretation of what we see on the screen. Now this is based on our levels from dark to light, or more specifically pure black, which is 0, to pure white, which is 255. And I can choose to have, if we have a look at this, the pure black doesn't actually start. There's a couple of little dots there. It doesn't actually start till there, and it's very, very gradual. And then we do have quite a big chunk of white. There's a lot of sort of grey areas. Now the histogram allows us to start playing around with those levels. So we can start having you know what, we're going to decide that there's more of the central black. This is sort of 50%, and I can also choose to have that black come up even darker. Likewise, I can bring my white down as well and choose more of the areas to be pure white. So what I do recommend is have a quick play around with that, see if you can get something that's going to have at least some decent line work, and maybe even bring down the white a little bit to kick out some of the messier areas. So it does take a bit of playing around with, but definitely worthwhile. And a little preview so you can see it before and after. But you know, I kind of want to keep this line work pretty solid, especially for demo purpose. So I'm going to hit OK with that. Great. Now, if your line work is a bit lacking, or if there's some areas that need cleaning up, there are a couple of options again for this. We don't really want to jump in and start erasing with this. The reason for that is if I hit E for eraser, there's our eraser there, we do have some selection of different eraser options up the top here. A nice soft one or maybe a more solid one. The issue with the eraser, if you see here, I'm sort of erasing away and it doesn't seem to do anything, and the reason for that is I actually still have the image underneath. So if I turn that off, you can say I have erased, and if you see this checkered pattern behind, this is what's known as basically an alpha channel. It's our invisible field behind our layer. So erasing is just going to get you to the background there. There is a way where we could basically create a new blank layer just by clicking that button there and selecting white and going to our paint bucket, getting shortcut G and dropping that. So create a white layer, and that way if I do erase on the layer above, it will erase and clean up. However, I'll show you another option as well, and this is using the dodge tool. Now the dodge tool is going to lighten areas, and this might be good for certain cleanup as well. So depending on how much needs to be fixed up, we can use that, and basically we can choose to get rid of mid-tones, for example, and we can just run it over, and it will usually do a pretty good job of cleaning up some of the line work for that. The other option is also the burn tool, which is going to darken areas as well. And this one I've got set to shadows, and it will darken up line work there. So I might want to bring up these eyes a little bit more. And I could clean up this fish, but for demo purposes, you want to get some really nice clean line work before we go too insane in doing this. Cool. Now let's look at getting some grayscales here. So one of the nice things with storyboards is you do want to make it really clear for the audience, especially when doing production boards, on where the background is and where it isn't. And I'm going to show you how to do this sort of in a really quick way. Now, in order for this to work properly, we do need some pretty solid line work. If that's not the case, we can sort of fudge it a little. Now, I'm going to show you another quick trick just for darkening up your line work as well, and that is to duplicate this layer. So this is our line work layer. I'm going to right click on that, and you can go to duplicate. Oop. He says it's not there, or you can drag this down. This is my preferred way of doing it, is drag it down to the little icon there and duplicate that layer. Now you won't be able to see any difference because there isn't any, but I'm going to change this one to multiply. And you can see it sort of duplicates it and makes it sort of transparent to the one above. So it's going to sort of darken up those line works again, but you can do that in layers as well. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to delete. So I'm going to click on that layer, and you could go to the bin or you can just hit delete. I'm going to have this set, and I'm going to make sure that this blend mode here is set to multiply. This is kind of important because it's going to make everything that's dark still visible and everything that's white invisible to whatever is underneath, because basically we're going to be adding some shading in underneath the line work. So I'm going to double click on this. Let's just rename it line work just so we know what it is, and then I'm going to lock that. So there's a little lock mechanism, and this is so I don't accidentally click on it. I'm then going to click on this blank layer underneath, it's not actually blank. I've put a white fill on it, but if it is blank, that's fine as well. But we do want to make sure. Oh, I've actually got, this is the one that I erased from. It doesn't really matter. So it doesn't matter if it's a completely blank layer underneath. It's not going to make too much difference anyway. So I'm just going to add a fill to this one just to clear up the mess that I've made there. So this is working in a blank layer, and what I'm going to do is I want to try and start filling this in with some grayscales. And to do this, I'm going to use my paint bucket tool. Now, so a shortcut for this is G, but if I just click in here, let's say I pick a grey colour here, or you can go to your colour picker there and just click in there, it's going to fill in the whole area. Not really what I want. Now you can get this, I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. If you do want to step back further with Photoshop, you do Control Alt Z. If you hit Control Z, it will keep stepping forwards and backwards. Now with the paint bucket selected, there are a few options up here that are fairly important. First of all is the tolerance. We'll ignore these first few for the moment. Tolerance is how much it's going to be affected by its surroundings. Now, what we need to remember at this point is we're just dealing with an empty layer, so it's going to fill up straight away. And there's no real effect for that tolerance at the moment because there's nothing for it to argue with. Anti-aliased, I'll get to in a moment, and continuous I'll get to in a moment. What I do want to do is I want to check on all layers. So all layers is going to mean that this is going to be affected by whatever is visible. And I've clicked in the white area in his hair, and you can see it's kind of filled in everything again, except it's missed out a few little gaps. Now this is because of these little bits of grey. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to fill in everything that's of that particular colour. Now the higher the tolerance, the more it's going to allow to seep through. And as we can see there, I've got it up to 255, and it's basically going to let everything seep through. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to drop this right down to its lowest, which is 0, and I'm going to click in there, and you can see we actually get more. It's more tolerant towards the white. So let's have a play with that. I'm going to take this up a little bit, let's say about 24, and I'm going to tick continuous. Now what that's going to allow me to do is, as soon as it hits an enclosed space, it's going to stop. So it's making a judgment on these grayscales. So if that's a bit too low, I'm going to try that again, and that's too high. So back and forth. And it's kind of doing okay. I'm not that happy with it. So we might want to try a few different other techniques with this. You know, we could keep clicking forwards and backwards, but I'm going to undo those, Control Alt Z. If you keep clicking, it will actually try and seep out a bit, but again, we do want to get kind of a neat line. And these sort of grayscale lines are really sort of messing me up a little bit. So I'm going to show you another technique. Let's Control Alt Z, all of that. I've clicked a lot of times, so you know. So this is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is using our wand tool. Now there's two options here. There is the magic wand tool, and this kind of works in the same way. Again, I'm going to click on Sample All Layers. I'm going to click on Continuous, and I'm going to click in this area here, and if we zoom in, Control Plus, we can see it's also having to deal with the tolerance on there as well. So let's Control D to deselect there. I'm going to try a different tool now. I could play around with the tolerance with this, but again, these little grayscales are messing us up. I could fix them up using levels, or using my cleanup, which I should do, but I'm going to try something else. And this is the Quick Selection tool, which is here. And what this does, this allows you, again, I've got the Sample All Layers and Auto Enhance ticked. This will sort of run around, and it may be a little bit to see. It will try and figure out kind of where you want it to go. Now, again, this is going to be depicted on how good your line work is, and it's not doing too bad a job. It's kind of selecting through that area quite nicely. And I'm going to just drip that down a little bit. And then what I can do is, if I'm happy with that, great, I can fill that in. If I'm missing some bits or it's seeped over, like I've done here, if I hit the Alt key, it's going to bring up the negative side of that, and I can subtract that. Or if I hit the Shift key or make sure it's on plus, it will add to that. So we can do all that, and then I can go G for Paint Bucket, select a grayscale that I want, and drop that in. Give it a couple of clicks to make sure it seeps all the way to the end. And that's kind of getting there. Now, there are a few little things that I've missed. Now, there's a couple of gaps here, and I'm simply just going to click in those with my setup for continuous and all layers on. There's a couple of other options I just want to show you quickly. If you're having troubles with the quick selection and the paint bucket tool, and you haven't cleaned up your line work enough, and that is using this tool, the polygonal lasso tool. Now, I really do prefer this tool to the other ones. It may be very tempting to use the standard lasso tool, which basically means you freehand draw. Unless you've got a really steady hand, it's going to get a little bit messy. And the magnetic lasso tool in this instance is just going to be very much all over the place. It's very hard to control. It's based on contrast, so hit delete to take it back a few steps. Great. And instead I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool. Now, this is a technique known as flatting, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to click, click, click. Now, you want to make sure you don't double click, otherwise it's going to close the loop on this. And I'm aiming to go roughly between the lines. Now, we don't necessarily have to have absolute precision with storyboarding. It's about, getting the general idea across. Now, I've drawn around, as you can see, the ear and the outside of the face, and I'm going to close this off. Now, I'm actually going to go into the hair up the top here. I'm not really concerned about that because I've already filled that in, and then I'm going to close that off by going to the end. Now, if you need to take this out a little bit further after you've closed it off, you can hold down Shift, and the little plus sign will come up, and you can add on extras. I'm going to add some weird extras. Or you can hold down Alt and subtract from that shape as well. Great. I'm going to select a different shade of grey. Now, if you really wanted to use colour, you can for this, but I would tend to keep it down to basic grayscales for most of it. I am going to untick continuous and untick all layers in this instance because I just want to fill in that shape, and there it is. If I don't like the color, we can change that, but we do want to have some variation on this as opposed to the others. Now, I have actually made a little bit of an error here. I should actually have it on continuous and click through. No, it's being very anti, and it could be because I've already filled this in and the tolerance is too high. Let's try that. There we go. Tolerance is too high, so it's running into that edge and cutting it off. So there's my line work. Great. And underneath we have these big blocks of color. Now, it may seem a little bit laborious, but it is a lot easier than just going in with something like a brush and then manually trying to brush everything, and that just takes a lot of time. And you may just be able to quickly jump in with your paint bucket, and if you have the right settings up here, you might be fortunate enough, if your line work is clean enough, to be able to drop and sort of click and continue in there. If that's not working, do try and use the wand tool and click through and do all that. And do try and get some contrast between the two here. So again, quick selection tool, paint bucket. If it's really playing out, just quickly switch to the brush tool and just do a really quick brush stroke, and you can see these marching ants. Again, Control D to deselect, and away we go. And essentially what you want to do is just get some grayscales happening for underneath your line work. And you can block this out fairly quickly as well. Once you have some grayscales in there and you get your settings right, you can see we can really quickly jump through and untick all layers for this one and block that in. And it's kind of going to stop when it reaches any other grayscales, or in this instance if you want to add color or whatever. And then again I can just sort of jump in and go, great, I'm going to just quickly draw around this ball for example. As long as if I'm behind the line work, I should be good. And click, click, click. And let's drop in I'm going to use a brush for this one and quickly zip it across. And there we have it. So this way we can really quickly sort of block in some shapes. I'm going to finish this off really quickly and we'll take you to the next level.